All right, so far in Adobe After Effects, we've been working mostly in 2D space. And what that means is, if I write some type here, this is going to be represented in 2D space, X, the horizontal, and Y, the vertical. And you can see if I go to position, I have X and Y coordinates. If I go to rotation, I only have one axis this can rotate around. But I can activate a 3D mode in this. It's not as robust as other 3D programs, but the way to access it is to identify this 3D layer icon and turn that on for that layer. So if you don't see it, make sure you hit toggle switches and modes, and you'll click this. On first glance, it might look like not much has changed, but you can actually see that you have these different axes here. Now you have X, Y, and Z. Z represents the depth, and you have an X rotation around the X axis, which is that horizontal axis. So now you can make this type look like it's rotating in 3D space. The Y axis is still the vertical, and now you see that what that looks like. And then the Z axis is going to look like what we had earlier. And imagine the Z axis is pointed towards us. These arrows, the red arrow represents the X-axis, the green arrow represents the Y-axis, and the blue arrow represents the Z-axis. And so this is nice because you could keyframe, maybe you want to keyframe some type swinging in. We'll do that, hit F9, F9, and that's going to be a little bit slow. Let's bring that a little bit closer. So that's that moving quickly. I'll just make a duplicate of this. Actually, I'm just going to delete. I'm going to delete these keyframes, and I'm going to turn this off. I want to do another example. The other thing you can do is play with the 3D space. So now this moves in the Z-axis, and I can move things forwards. I'm trying to move it forward in space like this, but I'm not seeing any result. If I want to preview the changes here, the reason I'm not seeing anything is because my view selected is front, but I want to select active camera, which gives me sort of the what a camera would see in the space. I'm going to bring in cameras later, but we can still have this kind of 3D effect without a camera, as long as we have the active camera view selected. And so we could keyframe, maybe we'll keyframe this coming from really far back. Whoops. 2000. So the further back it is, the bigger that number is. And then coming up to negative 2000, which should be really close to the camera. There you go. And yeah, let's see what that looks like. Now you could get a similar effect doing scale, but being able to animate it this way will maybe help you kind of work in 3D space. And also when we have multiple objects in 3D space, having this depth component is really going to be helpful. One way to think about working in 3D and After Effects is by looking at the multiplane camera, which is something that Disney Animation pioneered. It involves taking drawings and putting them on separate planes and using the depth in between those images to really create a sense of movement, parallax, depth of field. And you can see in here this arrangement, what we're doing is kind of moving these layers. They're like After Effects layers, and manipulating those can give us this effect. So this is a video about the multiplane camera, and I'll provide a link to this in the video information. But we're gonna jump into After Effects and see how something like this might help us understand what's happening in After Effects. So I'm going to open up a file that I've created in Illustrator. This is an ocean scene, and if I open this up, you should see it's kind of a panoramic scene. I have different assets on different layers. And just like that multiplane camera, we're going to separate these layers in space. And by animating them, or actually in this case, we'll probably mostly animate the camera, but by creating the distances between the layers, we're going to be able to create this 3D effect through the introduction of parallax. And we'll also look at some other camera effects such as depth of field and blurring. We can turn on lights as well. So I wanted to just do this video to give you an overview of some of the features of working in 3D and After Effects. So what I'm going to do is eventually I want to put this into an HD comp. So I'm going to make that composition right now. I'll use the preset settings, 1920 by 1080. 10 seconds is fine. That might actually be too long. And what I'll do is I'll grab these layers and I'll put them into the file here. And let's see. One thing that's important to note is the order in which you grab them dictates how they get imported in the scene. In this case, I'm going to undo it. I grabbed from the top to the bottom and brought them in, but if I want them to go the other way, I can click this way from bottom to the top and drag them in, and then I have them in this order. So the order in which you select the layers is actually important. I'm going to select everything. I'll hit P just to move everything along, and I'm going to use this composition to kind of to frame my animation. Okay, so a few things to look at right here. Earlier I said, you can choose the view that you're using. I want to use active camera right now. Just, I'm going to bring in a camera later, but right now I do want to see when there are changes in the 3D space. For reference, I can have multiple views here. I'm just going to do 2 views, and you select the view and it tells you this is the active camera. And maybe in this view, you can see this is the top view. The reason it looks like this is because none of these layers are 3D. So actually all the views should be similar. Let me select all the layers, turn on 3D on the layers, and you should see that now I'm actually imagine standing above this composition, and I'm seeing these are the layers kind of represented. Think of them as pieces of paper or planes of glass, like in the multiplane camera. And so I'm seeing the profile of these things. So top view could be something that would be helpful. And now I'm starting to see they're all on the same plane. You can see that they're all at 0 for the Z coordinate. So what I want to do is start to create separation. I'm going to just close this all. So what I'll do is I'll start with the background here, and then I want to really push it back into space. So I can click and drag or do something like this. And you're seeing I'm actually moving it backwards in space. Now you can see backwards in space is the positive value, and you can see what the active camera is seeing. Hopefully you're starting to get a sense of, hey, these are kind of flat objects in 3D space. So I really, in order to create a more, a greater sense of depth, I really want to push this. Sometimes I see people creating files and there's very little separation in the depth, and you're not really going to get as pronounced as an effect. So this should go pretty far back. Maybe we'll say 2000. You might also, as it moves back in space, it's no longer taking up the entire frame. So you might want to scale it up so that it fits the frame. You want to create that illusion. All of this is an illusion. And then we can find these different layers, and you could also just, whoops. You can also go in here and click and drag if you want to move this. Now you're seeing it's moving back in space. The ground plane is this part. You can see if it moves forward or backwards, it covers things up. So maybe this is also further back. Again, to fill the frame here, I probably want to scale this up a little bit. Okay, the jellyfish. And again, what I said is, let's try to put some things closer to the camera and some things further back. I'm not sure if layer 8 has anything on it. I'll just turn it off for right now. The sea urchin, which you can see is that spiky thing. Maybe that goes a little bit further back. We have some seaweed here. I think this is actually on the other side. You can see it's on here, the right side. I'm going to undo that and just, make sure it goes back in space a little bit. Seaweed foreground, so that's something that probably wants to go closer to the camera or closer to the front. Move it this way. Seaweed midground, maybe that somewhere in the middle. Starfish, maybe that goes a little bit closer to the camera. There's a triangle fish that I think is off camera. You can kind of see it, it's right there. All right, so yeah, what I've done is I've created some separation between all these things. And again, I don't have a camera right now, so I could animate these things, keyframing them, moving them, have them moving in Z space, Y space. To keep it simple, I'm just actually going to bring in a camera and animate that and actually get most of my sense of depth that way. So again, we'll bring in a camera by hitting Layer, New, Camera. We'll set this up like this. And again, we want to make sure that you were in the active camera view. If you're in front, it might look the same or look similar, but you're actually not seeing the depth, some of the depth cues. Okay, so let's open up the camera and just talk about some of the things that are here. There's a point of interest, which is what the camera is looking at. There's a position, and these things typically need to be both considered. If I just move the position, let's move the X position of 1, you'll see that I'm actually, and actually the top view will be helpful in here. Let me undo that. So this came in as the normal camera. You can see it's straight on. This really looks like the multiplane camera to me. But you can see that one thing I could do is actually go and kind of rotate this camera, and you could have this effect, and maybe you want this in some occasions. But that to me is kind of breaking the illusion a little bit. You can rotate the camera, have that angle change, and those are all things that you can change. Let me just go back to the original settings. So what I want to do is actually do a horizontal panning move of this camera. The way for me to do that without having to animate both is to bring in a null and use that null to control it. So I'll bring in a null object. I do want to make it 3D, so it's in 3D mode, and I will parent this null, or parent the camera to the null. And now when I animate the position of this null, let's go here and I'll move it. You can see that it's panning horizontally like this, and I'm not getting that extra rotation. So this is a way for me to bring in kind of a cinematic camera move, almost as if it were on a dolly or something. I might not go to the very end. I want to go till the edge of the scene. So there you go. You can see that goes to the edge of the screen. And all right, so it's taken some time to render, but you can see I'm pulling through here, and some things are, I'm getting a little bit of a parallax effect. Some things are moving at what looks like different rates. Again, nothing is animated in here. If I want to really push this effect even more, maybe I will create some more separation. I think I could add a little bit more separation between these elements. So yeah, Yeah, maybe the jellyfish, instead of coming up close, maybe it's really far back, and that's going to give me. I'm moving this back up here, and you can see it's up here and it's moving back. That will give like that sense of depth, and you can see the way that things overlap. This foreground element, maybe that could go a little bit further or a little closer to the camera, and that will create even more depth. And if you're having issues rendering this in real time or previewing it, you can always turn down the quality here, just to get an idea of how the timing is going. So let me set it to half for right now. And this is, just bringing an Illustrator file in, separating it into 3D space, and just panning the camera through it and looking at kind of these depth cues, the sense of parallax here. Let's go into our camera right now and look at some other options. Camera options, you can see like the focal point is like generally here. Right now, everything is in focus because we haven't turned depth of field on. Now, depth of field is this it's a photographic cinematic term. It refers to some parts of the image being in focus and some of them being out of focus. Generally, things at the zoom level will be in focus, and things further away and closer will start to be out of focus. So, all right, so I'm going to turn on the depth of field now. Now, a few things to know. I'm going to select the camera just so you can see. My zoom distance is up here. My focus distance is actually at 0 pixels, which is here. So when I turn on the depth of field, I'm going to get, let's see. I'm going to get this really blurry image. It looks like nothing's there. And that's because my focus distance, again, is right here at 0. And I need to adjust that so that this focus distance matches with whatever items I want to be in focus. So I'm going to maybe around here, around 0. So we're basically offsetting this. So if you don't see, if everything looks blurry, like it looks like everything disappeared, just track these two values. Okay, let's go down and kind of talk about what's happening here. Everything is still kind of in focus, and let's see, I'm on my active camera. If you had multiple cameras, you could switch here, but all right, so I want to look at this more closely. I want to kind of start to see if I can create a little bit more depth of field. So what I'm going to do is I have the blur level turned up, but by adjusting the aperture, if I make the aperture really small, actually everything is in focus. But if I start to really push this aperture, I should start to see that some things will get blurred out. And the things that are in focus are at that level, this focal distance. So it's kind of like a camera. If you think about depth of field, in a camera, if the aperture is more open, you're going to see this a kind of more shallow depth of field, versus if the aperture is smaller. So again, we're using pixel size here instead of f-stops, if you're familiar with photography. If it's really small, like 0, you should see no or very little of that blurring, because there's the depth of field is collapsed a little bit. Okay, so yeah, let's turn that on. And one thing always in After Effects, blur, it's a really expensive procedure. So getting this effect, it looks nice, but it will probably increase your render time. So it's taken some time to render. I want to just bring this up as one view and maybe look at this more closely. So here is that after it's been RAM previewed, and you can see there's some depth of field. Some objects, these objects are in focus, and then these other objects further back and away from the focal distance are going to be blurred. So this is a camera effect that we can use in After Effects. There's one other thing that we can try to bring in here, so you can see. So within this environment, we can also bring in lights. Now we'll go to Layer, New Light. We can, and there's different lights here: ambient lights, spotlights, parallel. Maybe we'll do a point light for right now. You can choose the color and the intensity. We can change all these things later. So there is a cast shadow selected here, but when I put this light in, and you can see that it is put in at this depth right here. If we hit P, you can see that it already has a depth associated with it. You can see what it's doing is that After Effects is now interpreting the scene to have light in it. So it's using that light to kind of light the things in the scene. And because it's a lower intensity light, it's just a point light. It's in the center of the scene. It's not that intense. We're not seeing that much of an effect, but you can pump it up, and you can use this to light your scene. It's, again, all these things start to add up: lights, blurs, and it will make your scene run a little bit slower. Now, even though Cast Shadows is selected here, these objects are not really casting shadows because you need to go into the material options of these. So, for example, let me find maybe the sea urchin, since we're looking at it right here. Open up the layer, and you see material options here. So you need to go into this layer by layer and turn on whether or not this will cast a shadow. Now, in order to cast a shadow, that needs to be on, and now you can see that's actually casting a shadow onto the scene. Imagine this, again, being like multi-planes and set up, and the light is shining. Why don't we... Let me collapse everything. And actually, maybe I can just do this for all the layers. I'll select them all, go to material options. I should be able to just say cast shadows on all of them. I think that behavior, yeah, so it looks like I was able to turn that on for all of them that way. So if we zoom out, again, this probably does not look great. The shadow is too intense. You probably want to have multiple lights in here, but I just wanted to show this effect and how you could achieve it. And if we are just dialing it in a little bit more, you might have a point light. Maybe you have an ambient light that's lighting part of the scene too. You could think about bringing in a colored light. Maybe there's a purplish light. Maybe I'll bring this intensity up a little bit. And again, we can kind of dial this in. You can see I can really bump it up. Maybe it's something that's much less intense, and